Okay, so like I said, introduction day, right? But first, who am I? What am I doing? And why am I here? I am a certified rehabilitation counselor. It's a really long title for saying that I work and I've been trained to work with individuals with chronic illness and disabilities. I graduated with my rehabilitation counseling master's from UW-Madison. I'm a PhD student there now. I got my bachelor's in human relations from the University of Iowa. And I like to say I'm from Iowa, but I've lived about 50% of the time in either Iowa or Wisconsin. And now I live in Illinois. So I don't know where to say I'm from anymore. I also work for the University of Kentucky and UW-Madison. I do a lot of research. I write a lot of papers. I teach and I develop trainings for other counselors. So nice and busy, but really my biggest personality trait is that I'm a dog mom. And I take every chance to talk about her when I can. So these lovely pictures are my little girl, Phoebe, our 5-pound Chihuahua. And there you go. So my counseling approach, my kind of approach to therapy in general is really a spattering of things, but I live mostly in logotherapy, which talks about meaning and purpose in life, mindfulness, and ACT, which is what we're going to talk about today. So what is it? The purpose is to help reduce psychological suffering and build meaningful lives. Not a super fan of this one sentence purpose. It feels really heavy and kind of a lot to take on. So hopefully this one sentence purpose will make a little bit more sense when we're done here today. But it was developed by Stephen Hayes. And so you'll see a lot of Hayes in here. And Russ Harris is a huge contributor. He's an expert in it. So you'll see a lot of his work in here as well. ACT is this mixed bag of approaches. So it pulls from cognitive behavioral therapy, so CBT, mindfulness, and then also has elements of the humanistic and the existential side of our psychotherapies. So when we look at what is this built of, we look at psychological tools, values, and focus. So what we do is we learn these new psychological tools to reduce the impact of difficult emotions and thoughts. This is really letting us not be kind of bowled over or pushed around or held back by our emotions. Then we work to clarify our values. And values can be defined a lot of different ways depending on which setting we're in. For ACT, we are defining it as encompassing how we want to treat ourselves, others, and the world around us. And we clarify our values so that we can really use them to guide our actions and enhance our lives. And you'll see how the values influence each of these steps. These processes allow us to then kind of shift our focus and pull our focus on what is important, right? So we focus our attention on what is important so we can fully engage with more activities. And there are 6 core processes, which we're going to go over in just a second. A few asterisks to all of the things before we start to dive in a little bit deeper. There's a misconception that acceptance means tolerance, and it's absolutely not just be more tolerant attitude. We look at acceptance as actively experiencing events without judgment while remaining present. And when we start talking about accepting difficult emotions or distressing emotions, sometimes feelings can come up that we're kind of dismissing or undermining problems or distress. And I'll do my best to be mindful when we're talking about specific examples to not undermine them. And that's not the point that I want to make. And that's not what ACT is striving for. So if we start kind of feeling some of those, we can bring it up and we can talk about it. The bottom line is acceptance is not a passive process. And I also won't ask you to just be more tolerant. Okay, so where are the foundations of ACT? We look at functional contextualism. And this, I think my favorite way to describe this is an analogy that Russ Harris came up with. And we think of a chair. It's a four-legged chair, and one of the legs falls off. So now we have a three-legged chair, right? If I would show you this chair, what's typically the response that we would expect? It's broken, right? It's damaged, it's faulty. And one of my least favorite words ever is probably dysfunctional, right? So most people would say, yeah, absolutely. This four-legged chair is broken because it no longer serves the purpose of a four-legged chair. Instinctively, we say, yep, broken. So if we take a step back and we think, how can this chair serve a purpose effectively? Ooh, we got some colors on the screen. I'm apparently distracted by shiny things. So the chair is not serving a purpose effectively. So how can we change the purpose? Maybe we say it's a practical joke. Maybe we say it's an art exhibit. Maybe we demonstrate the faulty woodworking process, right? So if we change the context of how the chair functions, we can change the purposes. So when we're starting to ask context questions in ACT, we ask questions like, what function does this behavior or emotion have? What is the purpose and what are the consequences? The other foundation is the relational frame theory. And I'm sure most of us are pretty familiar with this, whether we know the name for it or not. So it's a theory of language. And what I want you to do, take a moment, you can close your eyes, you can look down at the ground, stare up at the ceiling, just take a moment, and I want you to imagine an apple. Okay, so what came to mind? Does anybody want to share what their mind developed for that apple? That's okay. So typically what we see coming to mind as we think of the color apple, we think of the texture, the type, right? We might think of an apple pie. We might think of a slice of pie. We might think of an apple with a bite out of it. You might taste the tart Granny Smith or smell cinnamon of a hot apple crumble, right? Is anybody getting hungry? It's just that time of day. What this is a personal experience. And in ACT, what we do is we call these events. And these events are really any private experience that a human has. It can be a thought, feeling, something you taste, touch, hear. So when you think apple, you can have all these different events. We can see all these associated events. And it's a very individualized process. For a time, we're not going to do this next activity, but it's probably the one you're familiar with. So Titchener's repetition. When we say a word for roughly 30 seconds, if you say it over and over and over, you start to kind of lose meaning to this word, right? So if we would say apple, the first time you might smell that hot apple crumble, but the more we say it, we no longer smell that tasty apple crumble. It really starts to lose that meaning. So when you lose this meaning, that's called Titchener's repetition. And this brings you back to the point of being in young childhood where you could hear the word apple and it didn't really have any meaning to you, or maybe it had a very limited meaning. After years of apple events, it starts to become a part of this relational frame, this relational network that includes everything from tastes, smells, emotions, memories. And that's all within that theory. Okay, back to the 6 processes of ACT. This contains, the first one is contact with the present moment. And really, we're going to be here now. We make contact with that present moment, and we're consciously shifting our attention to be more fully engaged with our environment. Second process is acceptance. And this is really when we start opening up. So we work to be willing to open up spaces for these unwanted private experiences, right? These emotions and the memories, the urges. Instead of fighting or resisting these unwanted private experiences, we start opening up space to really allow these experiences to flow through us. It's not a passive acceptance of difficult situations. And really, ACT advocates for committing to improving difficult situations or leaving them. And some difficult situations we just can't leave, right? So we make space for the difficulty and intentionally move into acceptance. When we look at diffusion, and this is watching your thinking. Diffusion is short for cognitive diffusion, and this step really involves learning to notice and acknowledge and separate from your cognitions or your thoughts. We step back and we kind of observe them instead of being dominated by them. So we can use pictures, words, a combination of both, and allow them to be present without challenging them or being distracted by them. We just kind of hold them lightly. We have our thoughts and here they are. Acceptance and diffusion work together. We make room and allow for them to come and go freely in their own time. Next is self as a context. We also call this the noticing self. We kind of look at the self as 2 parts of the mind. And the part that generates the thoughts and memories, that's one side. Right? Then the other side, the noticing self, just kind of silently notices and focuses and pays attention and is very aware of what you're thinking, what you're feeling at any given moment. Those are the 2 pieces. And when we're really looking at the noticing self and kind of tapping into that, there are other areas that can use self as context and the noticing self in different ways. So when we're talking in ACT, when we're working in ACT, this is the definition that we're using. If you are familiar with mindfulness, or you've heard that word used a lot, it's become quite prevalent in our world. These first 4 processes are the same core processes that make up mindfulness. So if they're feeling familiar, that's where it's from. So the final 2 are values. We know what matters, right? These are desired qualities of behaviors how you treat yourself and others in the world around you. And we use these values in different ways. We can think of inspiration, motivation, and guidance. And really, they just help kind of direct us when we feel lost. Finally, committed to action. We have to do what it takes. This is not an easy journey, but we have to also be committed to that action. So we take effective action guided by our values to build this full, rich, meaningful life. And we can include goal setting, action planning, problem solving, and exposure, all in this one little step. And we'll also be learning and applying skills that enhance life in this step. And I know that's a lot. It's okay. Just take a sip. So this is what the 6 core processes look like, playfully referred to as the ACT hexaflex, but this is how they all kind of intertwine. So there's not one that leads to all of the others. This is a very intertwined process, right? It's a little complicated though. So now that you know all of the individual pieces, we're going to simplify it even further. And it's the ACT triflex. Really, it breaks down to be present, open up, and do what matters. You can see where the 6 steps fall into these, but that's the easiest way to describe ACT. This psychological flexibility that you see in the hexaflex and the triflex, this really flows through all of the pieces and keeps everything kind of connected. It's your ability to act effectively while being mindful and guided by your values. So as this flexibility increases, so does your ability to be fully conscious, open to new experiences, and acting within our values. The last piece of this that I think is important, most of the definitions of ACT don't call out self-compassion specifically, but it's involved in all 6 of the steps. So when you're learning acceptance, we are kind of funneling in self-compassion throughout every step. So what are the goals of ACT? And I think most counselors, most therapists would agree that these broad goals can apply to most journeys. The goals break down into 3 broad categories: emotional, behavioral, and outcome. So how do you want to feel differently? What do you want to do differently? And what do you want to achieve? Since this is an introduction and just kind of the frosting of the cupcake, we're not going to dive into goals. I think it's important to know for the broader picture, but we're just starting our journey. Even if you've been working in ACT for a long time, we are in journey at a different pace, so we're not going to dive into goals. But we are moving out of the definition, history, foundation of ACT. Are there any questions that I can clarify before we move on to emotions? So I know that was a lot of information.
I have one.
Yeah.
I didn't get the self as context quite well, so.
Oh, the self as context? Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go back. Okay. So the self as context, I want to try to explain it a different way and not just repeat what I said. So bear with me here. So we are thinking of the mind as 2 different pieces. Okay. So we look at one side that does all of the thinking, and then the one side that notices. Usually when we start thinking of the self, we think about the side that is feeling and processing and responding, right? We want to pull ourselves back and really kind of tap into that noticing self. So I think I talk about this later on, but I think this can help. So you're running through a rainstorm, right? And you get under a little shelter. and you can watch the rain happening, but you're not wet anymore. You're not in it. And that's when we want to pull ourselves out and watch the self as, I think context is probably not the best word for everyday language, but we're watching ourselves from an outside perspective. So we're going to tap into that side of the brain. That's not really a thing. The side of the mind that processes what the other side is feeling and thinking. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? As my computer disagrees with me. Okay, so let's pop into emotions. This will be a little bit more discussion based. If you're willing to share, you can also send a chat and we can do this kind of more anonymously. If you change your chat to just me or just Kirsten, we can do it that way too. So to start off, I'm going to explain the whole process and then I'll read back the directions one by one. So you know what's happening and then you can kind of anticipate, okay? And you can participate fully and not share. That's still participating for me. So do whatever's comfortable and share whatever you feel comfortable with. So the activity, we're gonna just take a few seconds. We're gonna take a moment and take an inventory. We're just gonna listen to our body. We're gonna take a nice deep breath. You can close your eyes and you're just gonna take note of what you're feeling. What emotions are you having? And then you're gonna sum up this feeling into 1 or 2 words. And then the fun part, you're gonna take that word and assign it a color on the rainbow. There's no right or wrong answers. Whatever that word feels like, you're gonna put a color to it, okay? Any questions before we start the activity? Okay. So let's take a few seconds now. I'm gonna take a nice deep breath together, in and out. Listen to your body. What emotions are you having? What feelings are you having? And when you're ready, try to sum up those feelings into a word or 2. Feel free to write it down. And then check out this rainbow and pick a color. And if you don't know color names, it's totally fine. You can keep it basic. You don't need like a sea foam, right? So if a few people are willing, would anybody feel comfortable sharing their feeling word and the color they assigned to it and why you picked that color? That's the most challenging part of this. So if you don't have a good answer, that's okay too.
Hello.
Yeah. T, go ahead.
You know, it's hard to shut me up. So, um, so basically what I felt was contentment with a little spike of pain for my toothache. But basically just, I like what I hear so far, and I'm really kind of, and the color I chose was kind of the cyan, kind of a cool, just receptive is what it says to me.
It says receptive. Oh, I like that word. Thank you so much for sharing. So contentment, a little bit of pain, right? We're feeling good about what we're hearing. We're feeling open. And then that scion really screams receptive. I like it. Does anybody else want to share?
I can. I wasn't really, my words aren't associated necessarily with like how my engagement in this particular activity, but just overall. And I had tense, angry, and scared.
Okay. Thank you
My
for sharing.
color is red.
Color is red.
Mhm.
Do you want to share what that color says to you? What that means?
If I can do it without like choking up,
And that's okay.
it's about the fight.
So it's a fighting color to you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. So
Yeah.
we're tense, angry, and it's glowing red. And that's our fighting color. Good. Anyone else?
I guess I can go.
Sure.
So I guess the emotion or my emotions into one word would be uncertainty. And the color would be orange.
Orange. I like orange. Would you like to share what that color means?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very basic. I guess I see my life as a stoplight, and red is where I'm at right now because nothing's moving forward. So I'm not in yellow, I'm not in the green, so I'm at the orange color.
You're orange. I love that analogy. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. So we're uncertain, we're orange because we're just kind of stuck in between that stoplight, right? Fantastic. Does anybody else want to share before I explain to you why we're doing this? Okay. Thank you to those who shared. For those who aren't sharing, that's okay. We can come back and discuss this later if you'd like. So what I really like about this exercise, let me ask you a question first, if my computer would work. Instead of me telling you what I like about it first, let's see if you guys felt the same things. So as people are sharing their feeling words, their colors, we didn't have any of the same colors, but maybe our cyan, our orange, our red means something different to us. Are the meanings different? Are they similar? What did you notice as people were explaining their feelings and their colors and what that meant? That's okay. That was a lot to process. We're already a tight-knit group, right? So we're already sharing some pretty heavy feelings, and sometimes that's a lot to process. So we're noticing. We have used very similar words when we're describing ourselves in other situations. We might have used those same words talking about something that we felt last week or last year. We've said those words. We might have feelings associated with those colors. We might have our own meanings to those colors. And when you start to listen, when someone says, T, if it's okay, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Thank you. So when T said contentment, maybe you filled in the story in your head and said, I know what that word means, right? And then when she said scion, it means scion to me. You're like, oh, well, that is not the color I would have picked. Scion to me means this. And then when we heard why she picked the color she did, you had a really good idea of how T was feeling, right? You could relate much more closely. We're going to talk about common humanity when we talk self-compassion, but that's really what that's hitting at, is now I better understand how T is feeling, because contentment may not mean the same things to us. So when I use this exercise, I really like it because when we're experiencing emotions, you're having those private events, you're having those private experiences. And sometimes explaining those, you just sometimes feel like nobody knows what I'm feeling, right? It can be really kind of isolating, can feel isolating. So when we start to talk a little bit more about what that emotion feels, when we have different words, sometimes we can change, yeah, I get what you mean, to, man, I really didn't know what you meant, but when you say that, I get it. I have had similar feelings. We can empathize a little bit easier. Not that you have to justify emotions to anybody, but when you're having those conversations, it can be a little bit easier, and it can make yourself feel a little bit better as we contextualize our emotion. Will make a little bit more sense here soon. And really, some days it's just easier to say, I'm feeling purple, and that's as much as you got, and that's okay. So one of the questions that we have when we're talking emotions is, should I be feeling this? Have you ever thought, I shouldn't be feeling this right now? Or, should I be feeling this right now? And oftentimes for time, I'm gonna jump over the discussion question here, but oftentimes we see this a lot with feelings of anger, of excitement, of grief. We sometimes question if we should even be feeling these things. So, should you feel this? Emotions are natural and they can arise unexpectedly. So, really what we're learning to do in ACT is we're listening to our body, we recognize what's happening inside, and you allow yourself to feel, and then we respond. So, we look at a wave. What is the life cycle of a wave, right? It starts small, kind of picks up speed, gets bigger and bigger, and then it reaches a peak, and then it falls. How long does a wave really last? It's pretty quick, right? I'd say. What happens if you're standing in that ocean and you resist that wave? Right? You tense up and you hold up and you clutch your eyes and you're all ready for that wave and you're going to push back. What happens? You get smacked by that wave, and it can rock your world pretty good, right? So when we sit there and we tense up and we're not going to let that emotion have its wave, sometimes we can just get smacked by the wave. In ACT, we learn how to surf the wave. So we learn how to just kind of go with it. If your body is surfed, it's kind of terrifying. I am not great at it, but it's kind of terrifying, but you're not smacked by it, right? You go with the flow. And then ACT kind of gives you that tool, the surfboard, to make surfing a little bit easier. So this is an exercise that is called NAME. It's an acronym. It's notice, acknowledge, make room, and expand. There are a lot of exercises in ACT. It's a very activity-based approach. There's a lot of stories, a lot of metaphors, some homework. We include meditations. This is one of my favorite. So when we start looking at this activity, it's often easier to do with a counselor or with a therapist with that guidance. Once you become more familiar with it, this is something you can do pretty quickly, and you can do it independently a little bit more easy. So we're going to be thinking of emotions and urges. So what are the urges that come to mind when we have heightened emotions? I think of the urge to scream, my my urge to chuck my phone across the wall, right? So these are the urges we're thinking of. We've also used this, I've used this particular activity for quitting smoking. So those cravings we use as urges as well. So first we notice what is happening for you physically. We really just take a stop and feel where that emotion or the urge lies. We might evaluate the body, we might look at sensations, we might do a body scan, but we really want to know how it's affecting our body. Next, we move into acknowledgement. So what is this emotion? What is the feeling? What do we name it? So I might ask for you to say, I am noticing anxiety. That noticing it like that probably won't help very much, but maybe if we expand it and add in our noticing words and say, I am noticing anxiety as flutters in my chest and maybe shaky in the hands. That's where my anxious lives. So you can start to put it all together, right? So I am having a feeling of anxiety. I'm noticing it in my chest and my fingers. And this really helps us step back and get to that self as context moment of what's happening. We step back and we watch the emotion. And this acknowledgement piece helps. The kind of trick to this one is there might be a lot of layers to these emotions. When we're angry, we might also be feeling sad. We might be having guilt, fear, shame. These are all these layers, and we can sit and we can talk about each layer of this. You can make your acknowledgement statement as long as you need it to be. Whatever gets your emotion out there and acknowledged. And sometimes we forget to make room when we have those layers. So when we have a lot of layers, we have to make sure that we make enough room. So what is making room? How is this emotion existing in you? How are these emotions existing within you? There are a lot of ways to make room, and not all of them work for everyone, and not all of them work for every emotion. So be kind to yourself as you're working through this step. Be flexible and really put in the work to find how to make room. Two of my favorite ways is noting the properties. So what is the size, shape, temperature, color, movement? What is that emotion? And then making it physical, right? So we imagine this feeling as it's a physical object. Maybe it's a ball in your throat, and that's where your emotion lives. Maybe it's boiling water. We want to make it a real thing. We're not trying to change the feeling. We're not trying to make the ball smaller. We're not trying to cool the water. We're just noticing. And then last, we expand. So in this final stage, it's probably the most difficult piece of this exercise. We breathe into the feeling and expand around it. So we breathing into something. We can have relaxing and soothing feelings from this breathing. It can also bring on some extra emotions, right? I'm the type of person when I'm really upset, if I start taking deep breaths, it changes it to like sad and I start crying. So we make room for all of that and we expand around all of that. We take it slow, easy, and we adjust as needed. So you visualize that breath going in and around the feeling and expanding. And really what we're doing is we're just keeping room for it. So instead of being choked by the ball or suffocated by the water, now you've given that ball enough room to sit and be comfy, right? We're not constricted. It's not being distracting. just has some room to sit so we can get back to what's most important to us. Okay? It's a huge activity, and it usually takes about 20 minutes to do one. So it's okay if we're not pulling everything out of this one. We're going to go back to our wave for just a moment. So as they rise, they peak and they fall. And sometimes those waves can feel like they last forever. And right now, you might be right. Those waves might last forever. I would ask if you are resisting those waves, right? So as soon as we stand up from being smacked down by that first wave, as soon as we catch our breath, bam, there comes another wave, right? So as you learn to kind of flow with the waves, those smacks become a little less hard, a little less harsh. We learn how to recover faster, and they become more manageable long-term. It's important to remember that waves rise and fall quickly on their own, yet they may never disappear completely. And we're not looking to control our waves. We're making room for them. And making room for the crashing waves allows them to not completely knock us over. So this wave idea and the name exercise that we just talked about, we can kind of mush those together. Instead of locating and calling your emotion a ball, you might call it a wave. And sometimes that's just easier to visualize and easier to talk about. So then we can rate the waves. Is it the highest peak that it's ever been, or is it softly rolling onto that sandy beach? Okay. For time, we're going to move on to self-compassion. Any questions before we jump into this next bucket? Realizing that we could probably spend 8 weeks for hours together on just that last part. So let's move into self-compassion. It can be a hard journey. It's a long journey, well worth the effort because you are worth the effort. So what is self-compassion? There are a lot of definitions of self-compassion. ACT defines it as acknowledge pain and respond with kindness. See, easier said than done. So it holds 3 processes. We look at mindfulness, kindness, and common humanity. We'll get into those. This can, when we say self-compassion, it can sometimes grade us the wrong way. We might have this kind of misconception that it's weak, that we're being weak if we're being nice to ourselves, right? We might be selfish, or we might feel that it's self-pity. And really, these are not the things that we are thinking of. So I want you to picture 2 friends, and after you tell them all of the things that are going on in your world, and you end it with, this is what's troubling me. I'm experiencing a lot of pain. This is what's going on for me. And one friend says, that sucks. Suck it up. Come on, let's go. We all have problems. I'm seeing some faces that those are the reactions I would have had too. The other friend says, that sounds really difficult, and I'm here for you, and I have your back. Which friend are you going to be more inclined to talk to more, right? What takes more effort as a friend? Saying, you got this, or being there. It's a lot of work to be there and show compassion and support a friend, right? But we're all deserving of that. And if you feel your friends are deserving of that, we should take a little bit extra time and give ourselves that. So we need to work on responding with kindness and compassion towards ourselves. And this takes a lot of effort. It does not come naturally or easily. So be patient with yourselves and take your time and give yourself permission to forgive yourself during these difficult times. and we don't want to forget to appreciate. So when I say appreciate, we need to kind of back up and see where these tough or harsh thoughts about ourselves are coming from. And a lot of the times, these painful emotions, these difficult thoughts, the fight, flight, freeze, or flop responses, all of the things we're saying to ourselves is our mind and our body trying very hard to protect you and keep you safe. When life hits you hard, your body and mind respond in a way to protect you in the best way it knows how. And sometimes it doesn't know kindness yet. So what we're going to learn with self-compassion is kind of retraining our mind and body, giving it more tools to respond in a kinder way. The process of self-compassion. So it will look very similar to the things we've already talked about. We acknowledge the pain, we notice without judgment, and we name what is painful. All kind of sounding familiar already, right? Kind of, maybe a little bit. Okay. We are being honest with what really hurts. So there's an important distinction here of acknowledging pain and sitting in self-pity. We're being honest about what really hurts without wallowing in it or being stuck in that rut, right? So we're talking about it. Here's the facts. This hurts. We might want to get really specific and say, you know what? I'm feeling heartbreak. I'm feeling sorrow. I'm feeling anxiety. Other times, all we can say is this really hurts, and that's good too. The next step is open up and unhook. So part of this is part of the last exercise is we're making room. We are opening up and making room for those thoughts and feelings to be there. We're not avoiding, we're not tensing up and blocking it. We're opening it up and it's there. The last section of this one is unhooking. So we're unhooking from self-judgment. This can include self-criticism, self-loathing, self-hatred, and we're really diffusing those processes. So we're stepping back and figuring out what we're thinking and why we're thinking it. This one we alluded to earlier is common humanity. And this one's huge. This step involves that recognition that suffering is something we have in common with a lot of other humans. We acknowledge and empathize the pain of others, and we consciously recognize that they too are suffering with their own difficulties. Now, in this step, if we're kind of stuck in that self-pity mode, we might have feelings like nobody understands, nobody suffers like we do, and this thought, in this very minimalized context, is called experiential avoidance, which again is a topic for a whole other day. But that's what we're seeing. So when we recognize the suffering in others, we see ourselves have a common bridge, and it builds this sense of belonging and connection, and it also helps foster acceptance. On the flip side, as just kind of a side note here, I also don't want it to go too far the other way, right? I think we all have heard these words a lot, but it's, oh, but there are people who have it so much worse. We might hear it, we might get told it, you might be telling yourself that. And while it may be true that bad things are happening to others and you view those bad things as being worse than your current situation, it is not a but statement. It is an and statement. So because other people may be doing worse, it doesn't invalidate the pain you are feeling, and it's not saying that you hurt any less right now. So I think the common humanity can have that slippery slope. And I want to make it very clear that yes, others are suffering, but it does not invalidate your pain and suffering. Okay. the final one here before we move on is kindness. Probably a little bit self-explanatory. Like, of course, self-compassion has kindness in it. It's the core of self-compassion, although it's sometimes the most difficult to accept. So probably the easiest way to understand what this might feel like is if someone you deeply care about were suffering in the exact same way you are in this moment. What would you say to them? And what would you do for them? Now, we also understand that there's a difference between doing tasks for someone, like making them a meal, or sitting and listening to them and being the shoulder to cry on. Those are two very different things, but they're both forms of caring. So whatever you can do in your capacity, what would you do for this person? You'd probably respond with some kindness, right? So this is where that committed action comes into self-compassion. And this committed action, we look at kind words and kind actions. This really looks at the value of kindness in both inward and outward behaviors. Inward behaviors would be the self-talk, the kindness imagery, kindness-based meditations, and then the outward behaviors of, deeds and actions that are kind, caring, and supportive. Okay, so two sides of committed actions. These kind things. Also, appreciation is under that kind thing category, because I didn't have a better word than things. But appreciate that this is a journey, and remembering that harsh self-talk is how our mind and body currently knows how to protect yourself. And this journey is where you start teaching that mind and body that there are kinder ways to be protective. So we look at kind things. A couple of my favorites are really validating and encouraging. I get back to the and but statements. Have you ever had one of those really tough days, but you go out to a social event anyways, and you'll say something along the lines of, you know what, today sucks, but I'm here. Or I'm in a lot of pain today, but I'm here. One does not invalidate the other. This is hard, and I am here. I am in pain, and I am here, right? So we validate what is happening, and we encourage what we're doing. This is hard, and I can handle this. The other piece that I think is really important to remember with self-compassion is it's not an overnight flip. There may be times where you find yourself saying some pretty rough things about yourself, but now you've started the journey to kind of help correct those, right? So we diffuse the harsh self-talk. Give yourself grace and forgiveness and be patient. So when I won't call any of you this. So when I tip something over and break something, it's like, oh, you loser. Like, what are you doing? And I can stop and, okay, so there it is. There's the loser talk. There's the loser anthem, right? You know what? I messed up. Okay, fine. I am human and everyone makes mistakes, right? It's the same thing you'd say to your friend or your child or your parent when they, I'm such a loser. You'd correct them. We can start correcting those for ourselves, but we can also make mistakes when we're trying to be more compassionate to ourselves, and that's okay. Just remember to take time and be compassionate when we are harshest to ourselves. One more slide and then we'll go to the wrap up. So there are quite a few barriers that can come up when we talk about self-compassion. We've kind of talked about a few of them. Sometimes it can just straight up be overwhelming. We can have these self-judgment thoughts. You know what? That was my fault. I deserve what I got. This can bring up a lot of painful memories. What we would do is we just pause, name, acknowledge, make room, and diffuse those cognitions, right? We'd go back to that naming exercise. Sometimes we can feel like harsh self-talk motivates us. I don't know how many times I have said I have to be hard on myself. If I go easy on myself, nothing will ever get done. I like the carrot and the stick analogy here. If you have a carrot in front of you, are you going to want the rotten one that smacks you in the nose every once in a while? Or are you going to want the one that says, hey, you can do it, right? So I know we're shrinking these up and making them seem a little silly, but that's okay. Another barrier is one that we get a lot, is that I don't deserve kindness. Other people do, but not me. That's some pretty harsh self-talk. So in that case, if that's what's coming up, what we need to do is we need to pause and notice, name those feelings, and diffuse those cognitions. Finally, the last barrier that we'll bring up is remembering. It can open up the past. So being kind to yourself may bring up some painful memories. And what we really need to be doing is responding with kindness and reassurance. And with this, so I'm trying to think of a metaphor here that would be helpful to understand how this could be a barrier. So say you are a kindergarten teacher and today is the first day of class, right? All the kids are pretty good. Nap time happens. We get all the kiddos falling asleep and you're reading your book or grading homework on the first day, whatever. It's all quiet. All the kiddos are sleeping. And then one little Susie Q wakes up and just starts crying. I miss my mom. I miss my dad. I miss my dog. I just want to go home. I feel so alone here. Well, this crying episode wakes up all the kids, right? And all the kids start crying and they all feel so alone because they miss their mom. They miss their home. They miss their dogs. What are you going to do? What do you have to do? You could yell and threaten them. If you don't go back to nap, then I'm keeping you here forever. They might be quiet, but they are not calm and they do not feel secure, right? You could walk away. You're like, you know what? I'm gone. You might feel better, but there are no way those kids are feeling calm or supported, probably hurt a little bit more. But if you'd stop and say, you know what? It's okay. We are here. I am here. First days are hard, and I'm not leaving. We're good. We'll get to know each other, right? So by responding with that kindness and reassurance, you're not keeping that ball spinning of feeling alone or feeling anxious or feeling insecure. You're responding differently and can recover differently from these painful memories that might be coming up. Okay. We'll open it up for questions and comments at the way end. First, I want to give you just a couple of caps because we have talked about so much. There's so much here. A few takeaways. We are looking at emotions. What we do is we notice those physical sensations. We acknowledge the emotion by name. We make room. And how is this emotion existing inside of you? And then we expand. We breathe and expand around the emotion. We're not looking to change. We're just looking to make room. Acceptance does not mean tolerance. You don't have to just lay down and take it. We are making room for it to exist. And of course, give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to open up and give yourself forgiveness when you just can't open up very good today. Tomorrow's a new day and we'll try again. Self-compassion. Words matter. The words you say to yourself, they matter. We look at ACT built on that theory of language. Words matter to us. We can pick better words. We can pick kinder words. Remember that this whole thing is a journey, and we all are on this journey in different steps. We will all have different steps on this journey, and you deserve kindness. You deserve this. So remember, acceptance is a journey. There are no wrong emotions, and you deserve kindness. So with that wallop of information, what are we thinking, feeling, questions, comments? We can quit the recording so you guys feel a little bit more comfortable to share, and we can open up the